This will probably be the most shocking video I'll ever watch on this channel. This is a video suggestion via a donation. Immediately I saw this request, I was like, what the hell am I seeing here? I mean, this can't be right. Is this person playing a game with me? Are they just trying to, I don't know. I was thinking a lot of things. And you know, as a black person, when I sit down and see people in the US, anytime a black person doesn't think the proper way you're supposed to think about black issues, for example, they're called sellouts, they're called coons, they're called whatever other word that they call them. I've always thought that was a bit out of place. I mean, everybody can't believe the same thing. Some people just can believe different things, even if they have the same race. But at this point, I'm feeling like a sellout for $2 because that was the request with the donation. Due to that, I had to go and check this. I browsed it, and this man actually existed. I didn't want to read further, but I saw enough articles from credible sites that confirmed that he existed. But I didn't want to read further so that I won't spoil the reaction in any way. But this is really shocking. So I'm not going to keep talking about this. I'm going to get right into it.
While slavery existed in the American colonies through the establishment of the United States as a country until the end of the Civil War, there have been many misconceptions about slavery in general. Most Americans are not aware that there were some black former slaves and freemen who also owned black slaves, and some became very prominent in politics as well, despite the racial prejudice that existed. Some black slave owners inherited their slaves from their masters, who were themselves freed in their wills. Others were either born free or emancipated by their masters and then bought their own slaves, while others were able to buy their own freedom and that of their families. Who were these black slave owners, and how did they attain such a status in a white-dominated society? What set them apart from other blacks, and what made them comparable to whites in some of the colonies and later states? What changed in colonial society, altering the status of indentured servants to lifetime slaves, and why? Who was Anthony Johnson? The vast majority of African Americans in the United States were enslaved, in all of the states, not just the South. Our first person of note is Anthony Johnson, who was born in Angola and captured by Portuguese slave traders, and he was given the name Antonio. Then his captors sold him into the Atlantic slave trade. He sailed to Virginia in 1621 aboard the ship James. The Virginia muster, or census... I'm aware
that most of the slaves that were taken by the Portuguese were stolen. The British colonies and the French colonies and the rest of those guys may have paid for slaves for the most part, but I think the Portuguese were the main culprits of actually stealing slaves. When people talk about slave owners coming to steal slaves, I think it's mostly refers to the Portuguese, not the British and the French, and maybe the Spanish were part of the Portuguese. I'm not sure about that, but I'm very sure that the British and the French weren't. I'm not saying that they didn't steal, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, it was a transaction. So this is not surprising. So Angola, Portuguese slave owners really attacked that part of Africa.
Into the Atlantic slave trade. He sailed to Virginia in 1621 aboard the ship James. The Virginia muster, or census, of 1624 lists his name as Antonio, not given, and he was recorded as a Negro in the notes column and indentured. Antonio, later Anthony, was bought by a colonist in Virginia, but treated as an indentured servant, which was not unusual, and Antonio worked for a merchant at the Virginia Company, and he became a Catholic. Johnson was sold as an indentured servant to a white planter named Bennett to work on his Virginia tobacco farm. Technically, he was not a slave, because the slave laws were not passed until 1661 in Virginia, so prior to that date, Africans were not officially considered to be slaves in that colony. According to the records kept by his benefactor and the existing documents, Anthony was nearly killed in the Indian Massacre of 1622 when the Powhatan Indians attacked colonists in the Tidewater region of Virginia. On Good Friday, they raided the settlement, including the Bennett farm, where Antonio worked, and killed 52 of the 57 men present. Antonio apparently fought back and was wounded and earned the esteem of his master.
Wow.
In 1623, a black woman named Mary arrived aboard the ship Margaret and John. She was brought to work on the same plantation as Antonio, where she was the only woman present. Antonio and Mary married and lived together for more than 40 years. Around 1635, Antonio and Mary completed their indentured servitude, and Antonio changed his name to Anthony Johnson. He first entered the legal record as an unindentured free man when he purchased a calf in 1647. During this early period, free blacks enjoyed relative equality with whites, and about 20% of the free blacks in Virginia owned their own homes and property. In 1662, the Virginia colony passed a law that children in the colony were born with the social status of their mother. This meant that the children of slave women were born into slavery, even if their fathers were free, European, Christian, and white. This was a reversal of English common law, which held that the children of English subjects took the status of their father. The Virginia colonial government expressed the opinion that since Africans were not Christians, common law could not and did not apply to them, even if they converted, as Anthony Johnson did. On July 24, 1651, Johnson acquired 250 acres of land under the existing headright system when he bought the contracts of 5 indentured servants, one being his son, Richard Johnson. Under the headright system, if a man were to bring indentured servants over to the colonies, and in this particular case Johnson brought 5 servants, he was owed 50 acres a head for servant. The land in question was located on the Great Nassautuck Creek, which flowed into the Punkateague River in Northampton County, Virginia. This was where Anthony Johnson operated his successful tobacco farm, and one of his indentured servants was John Casor, who became one of the first men to be declared indentured for life, effectively a slave. Under the 1645 Virginia Taxation Act, all Negro men and women and all other men from the age of 16 to 60 shall be judged tithable. So after a fire in 1652 caused him great financial damage to his property, he applied for relief in the courts and won. Back then, people were taxed, not property, but indentured servants and later slaves were taxed as property. It is unclear from the records why the Johnson women were exempted, but the change gave them the same social standing as white women who were not taxed. In the colonies back then, one was judged more on their religion as opposed to race or ethnicity in general, so until the advent of actual legal slavery, upward mobility was possible for many races. During the case, the justices noted that Anthony and Mary Johnson had lived in Virginia for over 30 years and were highly respected.
Okay, so before this point, slavery was not legal. I mean, but the story so far, it looks like it's legal. I mean, it's allowed or it wasn't allowed. I don't get it.
Case, the justices noted that Anthony and Mary Johnson had lived in Virginia for over 30 years and were highly respected in their community. In fact, a 1653 Northampton County court document lists Mary as Anthony's wife. By the 1650s, Anthony and Mary Johnson were farming 250 acres in Northampton County, while their 2 sons owned 550 acres. They also had additional indentured persons under contract, but the exact numbers are not known. His son Richard Johnson also had his own indentured persons, probably given to him by his father, who were effectively slaves with a shelf life. At some point, if contracted, they would have to be set free. In 1854, John Casor, who had been sentenced to indentured service for life for his escaping a previous owner in 1640, filed a suit against Johnson, claiming his indentured service had expired, and he went to work for Robert and George Parker. Johnson filed a freedom suit to get Casor back, but Parker won. What is amazing in retrospect was that Johnson, a black man, was not only able to file a petition to the court, but he was able to testify and give evidence in the court, which illustrates the rather egalitarian system in place at that time.
Wow.
However, Johnson appealed to the County Court of Northampton County, Virginia, and the court reversed its ruling and sent Casor back to Johnson in 1855, and Parker was forced to pay Johnson compensation. Then Casor made history, as he was probably the first person who was
Damn. Wow. That's a lot. That's a lot. Yeah, I was thinking that black people had no rights whatsoever. Like, they're basically just put on chains throughout their lives. And I'm not saying there were not black people that went through this, but finding out that there was that there were black people that were able to, okay, obviously there were people that they called house Negroes, the ones that were like working for the white man, but they were not kind of chained and they didn't really live a servitude life like that, though they still answered to their white master. Right? At least from my knowledge, I saw that in Django Unchained with Samuel L. Jackson, DiCaprio, and Jamie Foxx. But I never knew that they were actually real black slave owners, like that had the rights to sue, to get settlements. I mean, what am I seeing here? I'm confused, man. I'm confused. After this video, I'll probably go and read about it again, because I don't want to feel like, you can see a lot of content on the internet that could brainwash you, that may make you to start believing things that you shouldn't believe in. But I'm someone that likes cleaning up my edges to know everything that I need to know to an extent. I just don't like people telling me what I should believe. So I'm still going to check this story out on the internet, browse a couple of articles and websites to find out how true this really is, because this is like a very shocking realization for me. It's a very shocking realization. I can't believe this. I mean, what you hear all the time when it comes to this whole slavery thing in the Americas, you never believe that a black man could sue, could get settlement. You never believe that. Like, it's not even something that is even fathomable. It's not even something that I even think about. Like, what? I'm dumbfounded.
Compensation. Then Casor made history, as he was probably the first person who was declared slave for life in Virginia. That means that his black owner, Anthony Johnson, was probably the very first slave owner in all of the colonies, himself a black man. There were both black and white indentured servants, the whites being the most Irish of all, who, like the blacks, were also sentenced to lifetime servitude before Casor's case. The difference was that the whites could eventually purchase their freedom in most cases. Therefore, Anthony Johnson was apparently not only the first African American whose right to own a slave for life was recognized in the colonies, he was therefore technically the first actual legal slave owner, regardless of being black or white, as established by the Virginia court. Soon afterwards, slavery was legal in all of the colonies. Later, Johnson moved his family to Somerset County, Maryland, and leased 300 acres for tobacco farming for 99 years, which he called Torrey's Vineyards. When Anthony Johnson died in 1670, that August his plantation was given to Robert Parker, not to Johnson's children. The justification delivered by an all-right jury ruled that Anthony's land in Virginia that was given to his sons could be seized because he was a Negro and by consequence an alien. As a result, the 50 acres that Anthony had given to his son Richard wound up in the hands of his wealthy white neighbor George Parker. It didn't matter that Richard, a free man, had lived on the land with his wife and children for 5 years. A judge then had ruled that Anthony Johnson, as he was not a citizen of the colony because he was black, but he did own his own slaves, could maintain his property. What soon arrived after Johnson's death was a system of legal slavery in which enslavement was lifelong, hereditary, and based solely on race, and effectively established in all of the colonies in the beginning of the 18th century. As a result, Johnson has been referred to historically as the Black Patriarch of the first community of Negro property owners in America. He was the first black slave owner to be involved in a court case that resulted in an indentured black man, John Casor, to be legally determined as a slave for life. In effect, because hereditary slavery was not in effect during his period of ownership of Castor, the slave for life, and others he purchased, it is arguable that Anthony Johnson was in fact the first actual slave owner in the American colonies, and he was a black.
Damn. Man. What am I even watching? Okay. Let me try and understand this. There was slavery. Slavery was going on, transatlantic slave trade, all that stuff. Fine. But before Anthony Johnson was certified a legal slave owner, slavery was not kind of legal. So at that point, people could easily maybe buy themselves out, like they said. I talked about the Irish slaves, that they could buy themselves out. I know the blacks could not do that, but there was some kind of a chance for an upward, mobility, being a free man. I mean, like how we saw in Django. I hate bringing up that movie again. Django Unchained. Jamie Foxx was a free man. He was freed by another white man, but he was a free man. So it was after Anthony Johnson that you now had lifelong slavery. That's like a lifetime contract. Oh, man. I feel sick.
And others he purchased, it is arguable that Anthony Johnson was in fact the first actual slave owner in the American colonies, and he was a black man.
Man, I feel really sick. Let me get my drink. I pride myself on not being very emotional about stuff. I try to be objective in almost everything that I do. I try to not look at race in a lot of things. I mean, even a lot of things that I see in the current world where everybody tries to link race to everything. I try not to do that. So I'm not someone that is easily affected by all this kind of race talk or race this, race that, because I wasn't brought up that way. I think I mentioned it on this channel already. As a Nigerian, I may go through tribalism, but I don't go through racism because we are the same race. So we could discriminate against each other by tribe, and which is something that is very funny to me because I've always felt that human beings are naturally prejudiced. Human beings are naturally prejudiced. Everybody gravitates towards their own people in every situation. I mean, look at prisons. When people get into prison, they see segregate at the end of the day. And when I look at my country, for example, where we are supposedly the same race, we are Africa. I'm not even going as far as Africa. We are Nigerians. But you see people giving a job to someone of their tribe over someone that may be more qualified, even if it's not qualified. Let's just say, but they won't even give you the chance. They will choose their tribe over you. So it happens here. So I think human beings are naturally prejudiced. So and that's why I also feel that racism will never end. As long as you have a bunch of people that are different from each other in terms of culture, in terms of skin color, there will always be some prejudice. There will always be some prejudice. The only difference is that when black people are prejudiced, people don't look at it seriously because it is looked at as they have no power, so they can be prejudiced all they want. So if a white person is prejudiced, it's a serious thing because they supposedly have this power. I'm really, really shocked that a black man was the first legal slave owner. And I know some people may try to look at this particular fact as something that doesn't make any sense because there was slavery going on, which I get it. But from what I've watched and which I'm going to go and read more about, so I'm just going to go by what the video said. I'm going to go and research more for my own understanding. But this is crazy. It's something that I never even imagined in my whole life. And I always feel like I'm someone that is open-minded, is objective, and doesn't get emotional about this whole slave thing. But I never even imagined that this could be the case whatsoever. I never imagined. And to be honest, I think this is the last of the slave videos I want to watch for some time, because this is heavy. This is really, really heavy. So people have given me some suggestions about other slave-related videos that I should watch, but I'm not going to do that for now. Maybe a couple of months later, but for now, I just want to be, because this is just too much. It's just too much. See you next time.